I always believed in loyalty. It's something I held close to my heart, something that I thought defined my life. There are good women out there, women who stay true, who believe in the same values I do. I married Jessica because I thought she was one of those women. To me, she was the embodiment of love, someone I thought I'd grow old with, share laughter with, and face every challenge alongside. I never doubted her, not once. I mean, sure, I wasn't exactly at the top of my game in terms of career or money. I was always just a regular guy, making enough to keep us comfortable, but never hitting that big success that others seemed to. Sometimes I felt like I wasn't enough, especially when I saw Jessica's eyes light up at stories of people who made it big. But I convinced myself it didn't matter, because I thought we had something deeper, something that money couldn't buy. I had these dreams, simple ones really, of us living happily until the end, taking trips together, sitting side by side on the porch as we got older. But maybe I was blind. I never even considered the possibility that Jessica could betray me. It just didn't seem real, not for us. I remember even laughing about it once when a friend mentioned how fragile marriages could be. I said, Jessica would never do that. And yet, there was always that whisper in the back of my mind, that tiny fear. What if? What if one day everything I believed in was shattered? I pushed it away because I wanted to hold on to the belief that love was enough, that she was enough for me, and I was enough for her. It turns out I was wrong. But at that point, I was living inside my belief bubble, wrapped in the comfort of my own faith in Jessica, in us. I couldn't see the storm brewing, even though I felt the unease sometimes. Maybe I didn't want to see it. I thought what we had was solid, but as I learned, sometimes what seems unbreakable is the most vulnerable of all. I used to think we had it all. Jessica and I had built a life that, on the surface, seemed perfect. We had a cozy home, full of little things that held meaning for us, photographs from our trips, gifts we'd exchanged over the years, the small signs of a life shared. Our friends always said we were a great match. You two just get each other, they'd say, and I believed it. Jessica and I had been through a lot, and I thought we had come out stronger because of it. We had our routines that brought comfort. Sunday mornings spent with coffee on the back porch, evenings cooking together while we talked about our days, and the occasional weekend getaway. It wasn't a life filled with grandeur or extravagance, but it was ours. I loved the simplicity of it. I loved the feeling that we were in this together, that no matter what, we'd always have each other to lean on. But even in what seemed like our perfect life, I could feel the weight of certain unspoken things. My career wasn't where I wanted it to be, and while I made enough for us to live comfortably, I knew Jessica sometimes wished for more. She never said it outright, but I could see it, in the way her eyes would linger on the vacations our friends took or the new cars that rolled into our neighborhood. She never complained, but the way she smiled when she heard stories of others who had made it always made me feel like I was falling short. Still, I convinced myself that love was what mattered most, that no amount of money or luxury could replace the connection we had. I was confident that our bond was stronger than any material longing. So, I ignored the signs, those little hints that maybe Jessica wanted something more than what I could give. I just wanted to believe that we were enough for each other. And for a while, that illusion felt real. Our life seemed perfect, even if it was built on the fragile foundation of my assumptions about what Jessica truly wanted. It started with a simple knock on the door. I remember it clearly. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was just settling in to watch a game. When I opened the door, there stood my neighbor, Mark, looking a bit uneasy. At first, I thought it was about some trivial neighborhood thing, maybe something about the trash bins or the lawn. But the look on his face was different, like he was struggling to find the right words. "Hey, Mike, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice low. He didn't have to say anything at all. I invited him in, and he sat down. He fidgeted, avoiding my eyes, and I remember feeling a sense of dread starting to build in my chest. My gut instinct told me that whatever he was about to say, it wasn't good. "Look, I don't want to get involved in your personal business, but I saw Jessica the other day." He paused. "She was with another man, Mike. I saw them at that new restaurant downtown. They looked like more than just friends. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. My first reaction was disbelief. This couldn't be true." "Are you sure?" But Mark's face told me everything I needed to know. He described what he saw. Jessica, sitting close to a well-dressed man, their hands touching across the table, their faces lit up with smiles. As he spoke, every word felt like a blow. I wanted to defend her, to tell Mark he must have made a mistake. But deep down, I knew he wasn't lying. There was something in the way he spoke, a kind of sadness that came from someone who genuinely didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. After Mark left, I just sat there in silence, the game forgotten. The walls of my belief bubble had started to crack, and the reality, I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Jessica right away, demand an explanation, but another part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't heard any of it. I felt lost, suspended between two versions of my life, one where everything was fine and one where everything was about to fall apart. After Mark left, I felt like I was split in two. One part of me was convinced that this was all just a huge misunderstanding. Jessica wouldn't do this. She couldn't. She was my partner, my best friend. I held on to that belief like it was a lifeline, even as doubt started creeping in from every direction. The other part of me, the one I didn't want to listen to, was telling me I needed to find out for myself. I tried to push the thought away. For the first couple of days, I acted as if nothing had changed. I went about my routine: work, home, dinner with Jessica. I tried to convince myself that Mark was wrong, that he didn't see what he thought he saw. But in the quiet moments, when Jessica wasn't looking, I found myself staring at her, searching for some kind of clue. Was she acting different? Did she smile less? Was she more distant? Every laugh, every affectionate touch felt like it had a question mark attached to it. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. The uncertainty was eating me alive. One night, after Jessica had gone to bed, I picked up her phone. My hands were trembling as I typed in her passcode, a code I'd known for years. I felt a pang of guilt as I scrolled through her messages, like I was betraying her trust, even though I was the one who was supposed to be hurt. At first, everything seemed normal. Messages to her friends, her family, nothing suspicious. I almost laughed at myself for being so paranoid. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize: David. I clicked on it, and there it was. Messages that weren't explicit, but the context was clear. There were inside jokes, mentions of dinners, and late-night chats, the kind of conversations that were meant to stay between two people who shared something more than friendship. My heart sank as I scrolled further. I found a picture of the two of them, smiling at what looked like a fancy restaurant, probably the same place Mark had seen them. They looked happy. She looked happy. My mind felt like it was spinning, and I had to put the phone down before I dropped it. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. All I could do was sit there in the dark, feeling like my entire world had just shifted beneath me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there next to Jessica, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment we'd shared recently, trying to find the signs I'd missed. I kept hoping there was some explanation. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew. The truth was right in front of me, and no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I couldn't escape it anymore. The morning after I found those messages, I felt like a shell of myself. It was like the ground had crumbled beneath my feet, and I was free-falling without any way to stop. All my insecurities, all those small fears I'd managed to keep at bay, came rushing at me all at once. I couldn't help but ask myself, what did I do wrong? Was I not enough for her? These questions circled in my mind like vultures, tearing away at whatever confidence I had left. I went through the motions of my day, but nothing felt real. I went to work, but the noise of the office faded into the background as my mind replayed those messages over and over. Every laugh I heard around me felt like an insult, like the universe was mocking my pain. I tried to focus, to lose myself in my work, but I couldn't. The thought that Jessica had found someone else, someone who made her happy in a way I couldn't, was too much to bear. I started comparing myself to him. This David seemed like everything I wasn't. From the little I could see, he was well off, confident, charming. He took her to fancy places, places I could never afford. I couldn't stop thinking that maybe I was the problem, that I wasn't good enough, that my lack of success or my inability to provide her with the kind of life she wanted had pushed her away. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I had failed, not just as a husband, but as a man. Even at home, I couldn't escape it. Every glance in the mirror was a reminder. I saw the tired eyes staring back at me, and all I could think was that Jessica deserved better than this. I started questioning every part of myself. Was I too boring? Too predictable? Was I not ambitious enough? I wondered if she'd been unhappy for years, and I had just been too blind to notice. It felt like my entire identity was unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. I tried to put on a brave face, especially when Jessica was around. But even when she smiled at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't real, that it was all just a mask, hiding what she truly felt. I started to withdraw, pulling away from her without even realizing it. I was caught in this spiral of self-doubt, convinced that I wasn't enough, that I was never enough, and that maybe, deep down, I had always known that. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The weight of what I knew, of what I'd seen, was eating me alive. Every time I looked at Jessica, it was like there was a wall between us, a wall built from her lies and my unspoken pain. I knew I had to confront her, even though I had no idea how that conversation would go, or if I was even ready for the answers. But I couldn't live in this limbo anymore, caught between the past I thought I knew and the present that felt like a stranger. One evening after dinner, I decided it was time. Jessica was in the kitchen, washing the dishes, humming a tune softly, and I just watched her for a moment. It almost hurt more seeing her like that, so familiar, so much a part of my life, knowing what I now knew. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and walked over. I could feel my throat tighten, my voice barely there, as I said, "Jessica, we need to talk." She looked at me, her smile fading as she saw the seriousness in my eyes. "What is it?" she asked, her hands pausing in the sink. I tried to find the right words, but they all seemed to get stuck in my throat. Finally, I just said it. "I know about David." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Jessica's face went pale, and she looked down, avoiding my eyes. I could see the guilt flash across her face, and that moment confirmed everything. I wanted her to deny it, to tell me that it was all a misunderstanding. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed, her shoulders slumping, as if she was carrying a weight that had finally become too heavy. "Mike, I can explain," she started, but her voice was shaky, and there was no real defense in it. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. I could feel the tears welling up, but I held them back. "How long has this been going on?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with something between regret and resignation. "A few months," she whispered. Her words cut through me like a knife, and I felt my chest tighten, the pain almost unbearable. Months. She'd been living this double life for months while I was here, clueless, believing in a love that wasn't even real anymore. I asked her why she did it, why she lied, why she chose him. She tried to explain, talking about feeling disconnected, about wanting something more. Her words felt like empty excuses, and the more she spoke, the more I felt myself shutting down. It was like watching the life I knew disintegrate in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I couldn't listen anymore. I just turned away, walking out of the kitchen, leaving her there with her half-finished explanations. My heart was breaking, and all I could think was that everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, was gone. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and finally let the tears fall. The confrontation had given me the truth, but it hadn't given me any peace. Instead, it left me feeling emptier than I had ever felt before. That night, after confronting Jessica, I lay in bed, feeling like my entire world had shattered. She was just down the hall, probably sitting in the living room or pacing around, but it felt like she was a million miles away. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold and empty. Every corner of it seemed to remind me of what I'd lost. I couldn't escape it. The memories of our time together, every laugh, every hug, every whispered promise, now felt tainted, like they were all lies. I tried to close my eyes, tried to sleep, but the moment I did, the images would come rushing back. The messages, the way she looked at me when I confronted her, the guilt in her eyes. I could feel the ache in my chest growing, a constant, dull pain that wouldn't go away. I turned over, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was impossible. The bed felt too big, too empty, and I realized that no matter how much I tried, nothing would ever be the same again. The next day, I went through the motions of my life, but I was only half there. I went to work, but everything felt like a blur. People talked to me, but I couldn't focus on what they were saying. My mind was still stuck in that moment of betrayal, still trying to make sense of it. How could Jessica do this to us? How could she throw away everything we'd built together for someone else? It felt like a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. At home, it was even worse. Jessica tried to talk to me a few times, but I couldn't bear it. I couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of everything she'd done. The emotions were too much. Anger, sadness, confusion. One minute, I wanted to yell at her, to make her feel the pain she had caused me. The next, I just wanted to break down and cry, to let the grief swallow me whole. It was like I was on a roller coaster, and I had no idea how to get off. The hardest part was knowing that the person I would have turned to in times like this, the person I had always relied on, was the very one who had caused this pain. Jessica was my partner, and now she was the reason my world had fallen apart. It was a loneliness I had never felt before, a deep emptiness that seemed to stretch on endlessly. All I could do was try to hold on, to get through each minute, each hour, each day, hoping that someday, somehow, it might hurt a little less. After a few days of being trapped in my own thoughts, I realized I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed to reach out. It wasn't easy. I felt embarrassed, like I'd somehow failed, like this whole mess was a reflection of my shortcomings. But I knew that if I kept everything bottled up, it would eat me alive. So, one evening, I picked up the phone and called my older brother, Tom. He was the first person I thought of, the one who had always been there for me. When he answered, I didn't even know how to begin. There was a long pause, and then before I could stop myself, the words started pouring out. I told him everything, the affair, the confrontation, how lost I felt. Tom didn't interrupt, he just listened. And when I finally finished, he let out a long sigh and said, Mike, I'm so sorry, you don't deserve this. His words hit me hard, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt like I wasn't alone. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest, just knowing that someone else knew, that someone else understood. Tom came over that night, and we sat in the living room, talking for hours. He didn't try to fix things or give me advice. He just listened and let me vent. It helped more than I thought it would, just having someone there who cared. He reminded me that this wasn't my fault, that I wasn't the reason Jessica had done what she did. I needed to hear that. I needed someone else to tell me that I wasn't the failure I'd convinced myself I was. I also reached out to a couple of close friends, people I knew I could trust. I was surprised by how supportive they were, how much they rallied around me. They invited me out, made sure I wasn't alone, and reminded me of the good things in my life, the things that were still worth fighting for. I even went to stay with my parents for a weekend, just to get away from the house and the constant reminders of what had happened. My mom, in her gentle way, held me and told me that I would get through this, that I was stronger than I knew. Their support didn't erase the pain, but it made it bearable. It gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. I realized that even though Jessica had betrayed me, I still had people who loved me, people who cared about me and wanted to see me happy. And that meant everything. It was the first step toward healing, knowing that I wasn't alone and that there were still people in my life who would stand by me no matter what. After a lot of sleepless nights and conversations with Tom, my friends, and my parents, I came to a decision. I had to leave. It wasn't an easy choice. In fact, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Despite everything Jessica had done, there was still a part of me that loved her, a part that wanted to hold on to the life we'd built. But deep down, I knew staying would only keep me in pain. It was like trying to live in a house that was burning down. It would never be the same, and I'd only end up hurting myself more. I remember the moment I told Jessica I was leaving. I sat her down in the living room, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. My voice was calm, even though my heart was pounding. I told her that I couldn't do it anymore, that I couldn't stay in a marriage where trust had been shattered. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, and I could see the regret there, but it wasn't enough to change my mind. I had to put myself first for once. I packed my things over the next few days, taking only what I needed. Each item I put in the suitcase felt like a piece of my old life slipping away. It hurt, but there was also a strange sense of freedom in it. I was letting go of the weight that had been holding me down, making room for something new, something better. I didn't know what that would be yet, but I knew I couldn't find it if I stayed. Once I left, I found myself in a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. I started focusing on myself, my health, my job, the things I had let slip while trying to hold my marriage together. I went back to the gym, started eating better, and even took up running. Each day, I pushed myself a little harder, not just physically, but mentally. I wanted to prove to myself that I could be strong, that I could survive this. The more I focused on rebuilding myself, the more I began to realize that leaving was the right choice. I wasn't just leaving behind Jessica, I was leaving behind the version of myself that felt small, the one that doubted his worth. I was finding strength in the decision to move forward, to let go of the past, and to open myself up to the possibility of a better future. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the sadness would still hit me like a wave. But I was moving, one step at a time, and that was enough. After leaving Jessica, I found myself with a lot of empty space, both in my life and in my heart. The quiet of my new apartment was almost deafening at first, a constant reminder of everything that had changed. But instead of letting it swallow me, I decided to use it as a chance to rediscover myself, to focus on who I wanted to be without the weight of a broken marriage holding me down. I started waking up early every day, setting small goals for myself. At first, it was just about getting through the day, making my bed, going for a jog, cooking a decent meal. These small tasks gave me a sense of control, something I desperately needed. I began working out regularly, something I hadn't made time for in years. It was amazing how much better I felt when I started taking care of my body. The physical activity helped clear my mind, and I felt a renewed sense of energy that had been missing for so long. I also picked up old hobbies that I had abandoned over the years. I dusted off my guitar, something I hadn't touched in what felt like a lifetime. I used to love playing, but somewhere along the way, I let it slip. Now, each evening, I'd spend some time strumming, letting the music fill the empty spaces of my apartment. It was therapeutic, a way to express the emotions I couldn't put into words. Slowly, I felt pieces of myself coming back, pieces that had been buried under the stress and sadness of my failing marriage. I even took up painting. I wasn't great at it, but it didn't matter. It was something that was just for me, a way to let go and be creative without any pressure. I found joy in the colors, in the act of creating something from nothing. It was a reminder that I could build something new, that I could start over and create a life that was my own. Work became another area of focus. I poured myself into my job, not in an attempt to escape, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed. I took on new projects, challenged myself, and began to see results. My boss noticed, and soon I found myself being given more responsibility. It felt good, not just because of the recognition, but because I was starting to believe in myself again. I was more than just a husband who had been betrayed. I was someone capable, someone strong, someone with potential. The more I invested in myself, the more I began to feel whole again. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. Instead, I was defined by the choices I was making now, choices to grow, to move forward, to rediscover the parts of myself I had lost. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about what was ahead. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I was on the right path, and that was enough. Once I started feeling more like myself again, I decided it was time to push beyond my comfort zone. I had spent so long in my safe little bubble, first with Jessica, Then, in the aftermath of everything falling apart, that I realized I needed to see what else was out there. I needed to open myself up to new experiences, to things that would remind me that life could still be full of surprises, full of joy. It started small. One weekend, I signed up for a cooking class. I'd always been the guy who could barely boil water, but I figured it was time to learn something new. Walking into that class, I felt out of place at first, but soon I found myself laughing with strangers over burnt attempts at soufflés. It was freeing to do something where I didn't have to be perfect, where I could just enjoy the process and the company. From there, I began saying yes more often. Yes to invitations from friends to go hiking. Yes to a weekend road trip. Yes to the chance to meet new people. One night, my friend convinced me to join a trivia night at a local bar, something I would have never done before. I ended up having a great time, surrounded by laughter, with no pressure, no expectations. It was exactly what I needed, a reminder that life could be fun, that it was still filled with possibilities I hadn't explored. These new experiences made me feel alive again. They showed me that even though one chapter of my life had ended, there were so many more waiting to be written. And for the first time since everything happened, I felt like I was ready to embrace whatever came next. It was during one of those new experiences, an art exhibit I almost didn't go to, that I met her. Her name was Emily, and we ended up standing next to each other, staring at the same painting. She made a comment about the colors, something witty that made me smile. I replied, and before I knew it, we were talking. It felt so natural, so easy, and it was the first time in a long time that I found myself truly enjoying someone's company without the weight of the past hanging over me. We exchanged numbers that night, and for a while, I hesitated to reach out. The idea of opening up to someone again was terrifying. After everything that had happened with Jessica, I wasn't sure if I could let myself be vulnerable like that. But there was something about Emily, something kind and genuine, that made me want to take the risk. So I called her, and we ended up meeting for coffee. At first, I was cautious. I kept my guard up, afraid of being hurt again, but Emily was patient. She listened without judgment when I told her about my past, about Jessica and everything that had happened. She didn't pity me, she just understood. She had her own stories of heartbreak, her own reasons for being cautious, and that made me feel like I wasn't alone. Slowly, I began to let my walls down, one conversation at a time. We started spending more time together, walking through parks, cooking dinner, sharing stories late into the night. She was different from Jessica in every way. With Emily, there was no pressure to be someone I wasn't, no feeling that I had to prove my worth. She liked me for me, and that was something I hadn't realized I needed so desperately. She showed me that love didn't have to be complicated or conditional, that it could be simple, honest, and real. Rebuilding trust wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt the old fears creeping back, moments when I worried that history would repeat itself. But Emily was patient, and she never gave me a reason to doubt her. She was open, honest, and made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. Bit by bit, I let go of the fears that had been holding me back, and I found myself falling for her, not in a whirlwind, but in a steady, comforting way that made me feel like I was finally where I was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. Being with Emily wasn't about grand gestures or over-the-top promises. It was about the small moments that made life meaningful. It was the way she'd laugh at my jokes, even the terrible ones, or how we'd stay up late, talking about everything and nothing at all. It was about waking up next to her and feeling at peace, knowing that I was with someone who truly understood and accepted me. With Emily, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to be perfect or live up to some impossible standard. She loved me for who I was, flaws and all, and that was something I never knew I needed so badly. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized that what I had with Jessica had always been conditional. It had always come with unspoken expectations that I could never fully meet. But with Emily, there were no conditions, just love, simple and pure. I remember one particular evening. It wasn't anything special, just a quiet night at home. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, and I looked over at her head resting on my shoulder, her eyes half closed as she started to drift off. In that moment, it hit me. This was happiness. Not the kind of happiness that comes with fireworks or drama, but a deep, steady contentment that filled every part of me. It was the kind of happiness that made me realize everything I'd been through, all the pain and heartbreak, had led me here, to this very moment. Emily helped me see that true love isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who stands by you, even when things aren't easy. Someone who makes the everyday moments feel special just by being there. She was that person for me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally where I was meant to be. I had lost so much, but in the process, I had found something far more valuable, a love that was genuine, honest, and real. I realized that losing Jessica had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced me to confront my fears, to grow, and ultimately to open myself up to a love that was so much better than what I had before. Emily showed me what it meant to truly be loved, and in doing so, she gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. And that was the greatest gift of all. Looking back now, I can see just how far I've come. When Jessica left, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But standing here today, I realize that losing her was the beginning of something much greater. It was the start of a journey that led me to rediscover myself, to grow in ways I never thought possible, and ultimately to find a love that was true and genuine. It wasn't an easy road. There were nights filled with tears, days when I felt lost and unsure, moments when I thought I'd never be okay again. But every step of that journey taught me something valuable. I learned that my worth isn't defined by someone else's choices, that my happiness isn't dependent on someone else's approval. I learned that I am enough, just as I am, and that the right person will see that and love me for it. Meeting Emily was the reward for everything I went through. She showed me that love doesn't have to be complicated or painful. It can be patient, understanding, and joyful. And as much as the heartbreak with Jessica had once shattered me, it also made me stronger. It taught me to appreciate the kind of love I have now, the quiet, steady love that makes me feel safe, cherished, and truly seen. I often think about the person I was when all of this started, the man who was so certain his life was perfect, who was blindsided by betrayal, and who had to find his way out of the darkness. That person went through hell, but he came out the other side stronger, wiser, and more open to the possibilities of life. I learned to let go of the past, to forgive, and to move forward with hope. As I sit here, reflecting on everything, I'm grateful. Grateful for the pain that forced me to grow, for the friends and family who stood by me, and most of all, for Emily, who taught me that love Real love is worth the wait. Life has a funny way of surprising you, of leading you down paths you never imagined. And while I never would have chosen to go through what I did, I wouldn't trade where I am now for anything. I've found happiness, true happiness, and that makes everything I went through worth it.